Welcome to the Deep Dive. We take complex technical and economic reports and, well, we pull out the key insights you actually need.
Make them make sense.
Exactly. Today, we are digging into a really big tension point. Artificial intelligence is scaling incredibly fast, right? But the energy it needs is putting a huge strain on our public grid.
It really is. It's that classic innovation versus infrastructure problem. We're looking at some recent reports today focusing on distributional impacts and a proposed operational standard for self-powered deployments.
Right.
And they lay out pretty clearly how the sheer electricity and actually water demand from these giant data centers is testing our public utilities. The big worry, that the cost of building out the grid to handle it gets shifted onto, well, everyone's household bills.
That's the core of it. We're not just talking abstract megawatts today. Our mission here is to show you specifically 3 ways this AI power demand can hit your bill. Things like capacity charges, those confusing riders. And then, importantly, we want to unpack this proposed technical fix, a verifiable standard to make AI power itself so its growth doesn't land financially on communities that are already struggling or, just on your neighbors.
Let's get into it.
Okay, so to get the financial impact, we first have to talk about timing. It's not just how much power the reports keep saying, it's when it's used. They talk about scarcity hours, usually like 6 p.m. to 9 p.m.
Yeah, that window is key.
But what's so special about, say, 7:15 p.m.? Why is that the crunch time?
Right. It's fascinating when you zero in on that moment. Picture it. Everyone's getting home, starting dinner, maybe running laundry.
AC is probably still running hard if it's warm.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Central AC is fighting the heat, but the sun's gone down, so your solar panels aren't helping anymore. The grid is already stretched, relying on its most expensive power plants, often the dirtiest ones too, the peaker plants.
Okay.
So when a massive new AI data center plugs in right then, during that 7:15 p.m. scarcity window, it doesn't just add load, it basically forces the entire system's cost upwards, almost instantly.
And we're not talking about a small blip here. The scale is pretty staggering.
Yeah.
The International Energy Agency, they project global data center electricity use could more than double by 2030.
Double.
That's like the demand of a whole G7 country.
Yeah, it's huge. And connecting that back to the actual wires and poles, the U.S. Energy Information Administration, the EIA, they expect computing to be the single largest commercial electricity use by 2050.
Wow.
So utilities are seeing this coming. Companies like CenterPoint, PG&E, they're already announcing these multi-year spending plans, big capital projects, explicitly because of these new huge loads. They have to build out the infrastructure now.
Right, build the roads before the traffic jams everything up. So that brings us to the key question for you listening. If these costs are getting baked into these big infrastructure plans, how do they actually end up on my monthly energy bill?
Okay, so they generally hit you through 3 main ways. Now, first one is maybe the least obvious, but it can be really impactful. Capacity prices.
Capacity prices, explain that. Is that like reserving power?
Yeah, you can think of it like the grid's insurance premium. Grid operators pay power plants basically just to be available, to be ready to turn on during those peak scarcity hours, even if they only run a few times a year.
Okay. So it's insurance for reliability.
Exactly. It guarantees the lights stay on. But when these huge AI centers draw power during those same peak hours, they increase the overall risk, the chance that there won't be enough power, and that pushes that insurance premium higher for everyone.
Okay, so where are we seeing this happen? Is there a place where this premium spike is really obvious?
Oh, absolutely. PJM is the clearest example. That's the grid region covering Data Center Alley in Northern Virginia and other areas.
Right.
Capacity prices there.
Right.
They jumped. They went from around $29 per megawatt day, then they shot up to $269, and recently hit a record, I think it was $329 per megawatt day in certain auctions.
Well, wait, from $29 to over $300? That's more than a tenfold increase. Is that price sticking?
It fluctuates, but the trend is sharply upwards. It shows how quickly the financial risk of these new loads is being priced in.
So what does that mean in dollar terms? If you have, say, a 100-megawatt data center, what's that obligation cost?
Well, the reports estimate that if a 100-megawatt campus doesn't cover its own capacity needs during those peak times, that obligation alone is around $12 million annually at current PJM prices.
$12 million a year.
And if the data center isn't paying for it directly somehow, that cost gets socialized. It has to be recovered from other customers on the system.
Which leads us, I guess, to the second channel you mentioned.
Exactly. Channel 2. Fuel and purchase power adjustments. You often see these as PCA or FCA or similar acronyms on your bill. They're basically riders.
Riders, like add-ons.
Yeah, they're pass-through costs. The utility uses them to quickly recover expenses that go up unexpectedly, like higher fuel costs for power plants or higher wholesale energy prices, or those increased capacity costs we just talked about. That $12 million, it can flow through here.
Okay, so make it real for me. If my overall wholesale costs go up, say, 5% because of this new demand, what does that actually look like on my bill?
So the forces looked at an average U.S. summer bill, maybe around $185 a month.
Sure.
A 3% increase in those wholesale or capacity costs translates to about, $5.55 extra per month.
Okay.
If it's a 5% increase, you're looking at more like $9.25 a month extra. And in places like Virginia, where data center growth is really concentrated, the reports project the combined impact of these pass-throughs could reach something like $21.43 per month by 2027.
Wow, okay, so that adds up quickly. Capacity premiums, pass-through riders. What's the third channel?
The third one is upgrade riders. This is about the long-term debt from building new physical infrastructure.
Ah, the actual poles and wires.
Right. When you need brand new substations, high-voltage lines, maybe even land purchases to serve a cluster of these huge data centers, well, that costs serious money. We're talking $13 million to $27 million just for a single 230 kilovolt line rebuild in the Dominion Energy Zone, for instance. That spending, that capital expenditure, gets added to the utility's rate base. And then all customers pay it off with interest over many years, sometimes decades, through the delivery charges on their bills.
So capacity costs, fuel riders, and these long-term infrastructure upgrades. It feels like a slow squeeze on the average person's wallet. But let's talk about something really crucial here, the equity impact.
Yes.
These reports highlight that low-income households already spend a much higher percentage of their income on energy, right? Maybe 15 to 26%, which is like triple the average burden.
That's right. The energy burden is much higher.
So these cost shifts, they don't just add a few dollars. They land hardest on people who are already struggling to pay their bills. It really becomes a question of who pays first and who pays the most.
It's a critical point. It creates an immediate financial strain for the most vulnerable households. That distributional impact is a major focus.
Okay, now energy isn't the only utility getting squeezed here. Let's pivot quickly to water, because cooling these massive data centers takes a surprising amount of water.
It really does, and it often flies under the radar. But when data centers pull huge amounts of water for their cooling systems, they're often competing directly with the local town or city's water supply.
Competing how? Like drawing from the same river or aquifer?
Exactly. Or it might force the municipality to invest in new infrastructure, new wells, pipelines, water treatment upgrades, just to keep up with the demand. And guess what?
Those costs also end up on the water bill for everyone.
You got it. Those new assets get added to the water utilities rate base, and all the local customers pay for them over time.
Is there a specific case that really shows this scale?
Yeah, the reports highlighted the Dallas, Oregon. There were some public disclosures there showing a Google data center campus used over 355 million gallons of water in just 1 year, 2021.
355 million gallons. How much is that relative to the town?
In a relatively small city like the Dallas, that was more than a quarter of the entire city's municipal water use for the whole year.
Wow, a quarter of the town's water for one facility.
And nationally, the estimates are that U.S. data centers are drawing hundreds of millions of gallons every single day. So it's definitely a systemic utility issue, not just about electricity.
Okay, so we've laid out the problem pretty clearly. It's the peak hour electricity demand, the big infrastructure needs for power and water, and how that shifts costs onto regular folks. Now, let's talk about the fix.
Right, the proposed solution.
The reports detail this operational standard for self-powered deployments, and the core idea seems to be, being green at noon doesn't help at 7:15 p.m. Can you unpack that? What's the difference between just buying renewable energy credits, RECs, and this 247 matching idea?
That distinction is absolutely critical. Buying annual RECs looks good on paper for, carbon accounting. You buy enough solar credits to match your yearly usage. Fine. But it does basically nothing to solve the actual grid problem, which happens during those specific scarcity hours when solar isn't available.
Because the sun isn't shining at 7:15 p.m.
Precisely. So this self-powered AI standard says, no, you need to prove you're covering your own load cleanly around the clock, especially when the grid is stressed. It demands 4 specific verifiable signals to prove the data center is operating with near-zero reliance on the public grid during the most expensive, highest carbon hours.
4 signals. Okay, let's break them down. What are they?
We can kind of group them. 2 are about the supply you bring, and 2 are about measuring your exposure or reliance on the grid.
Okay, supply first. What do they need to show?
First is AACS, Attributable Additional Clean Supply. Fancy acronym, but it just means you have to prove you caused new clean energy like a new solar or wind farm plus storage to be built, and that its output is directly tied or attributed to your data center's load. No claiming credit for existing clean power.
So, prove you built something new and clean specifically for your load. Got it. What's the second supply requirement?
Second is FSSA, Firm Self-Supply Availability. This means you have to demonstrate, technically, that you can power your own operations through a typical scarcity period, say, a 4-hour block in the evening, using your own dedicated resources. Batteries, maybe dispatchable clean generation, whatever it is, prove you won't need to pull from the grid when it's already strained.
Okay, so rule 1, build new clean stuff. Rule 2, prove that stuff actually works reliably when needed most, so you're not leaning on the grid during peak times. That seems to tackle that capacity premium issue we talked about.
Exactly. It shows you're not adding risk during scarcity hours.
All right, so what about the other 2 signals, the measurement ones?
Right. This is about transparency. The standard requires developers to publish data. The first measurement is HCC-EHCC. That's hourly clean coverage or energy hourly clean coverage paired with CMS, the clean matching shortfall. Basically, they need to publish an hourly scoreboard. It shows, for every hour, how much of their energy use was matched by their local, clean resources within the same grid region. And crucially, it quantifies the shortfall, the CMS, how many megawatt hours they failed to cover cleanly in that hour.
So an honest, hour-by-hour accounting of how clean their operation really was. Makes sense. And the last one, it looked a bit complicated. SAIE.
Yeah, SAIE, Scarcity Adjusted Import Exposure. It sounds complex, but the idea is simple. Prove you are not relying on the public grid when everyone else needs it most and when it's dirtiest.
How do they prove that?
They have to keep their SAIE value at or very close to 0. The standard says approximately 0 specifically during the worst 10% of hours on the grid. That's the top decile of hours based on electricity price or carbon intensity.
Ah, okay. So in plain English, during the absolute peak stress times, the most expensive and polluting hours, you got to show you're pulling basically nothing from the shared grid.
Precisely.
Yeah.
If you can demonstrate that, hour by hour, with verifiable data, then you're proving you are not the one driving up capacity costs or forcing dirty peaker plants online. You're not contributing to the 7.15 p.m. problem.
This really shifts the whole conversation, doesn't it? From just making vague green claims to providing actual hour-level verifiable data about your grid impact and cost responsibility.
Absolutely.
And the idea is that regulators, or maybe cities granting permits, could simply require this public data ledger as a condition, like show us your numbers hour by hour, or you don't get the favorable rate or the permit.
That's the concept. Make this operational performance a requirement. And you mentioned Europe. They're already moving towards mandatory reporting of energy and water, key performance indicators, KPIs, for data centers above a certain size, like 500 kilowatts. So the transparency push is happening elsewhere too.
Right.
And that level of required transparency has other benefits. It pushes developers to think harder about where they build, maybe avoiding areas where the grid is already congested, and it forces disclosure about water use, where it's coming from, how much is reused, setting caps, minimizing that strain on local water systems from the start.
Okay, let's try to tie this all together for everyone listening. The core problem we identified is cost shifting. It happens mainly through those higher capacity charges, the grid's insurance premium going up, then through fuel adjustment riders that pass those costs on quickly, and finally through those long-term infrastructure upgrades for power lines and substations that end up in your delivery charges for decades.
Right.
And these costs hit hardest on households that are already facing high energy burdens.
Yeah, the takeaway really is that the answer isn't necessarily about stopping useful AI development. The fix proposed here is about operational accountability. It's about requiring these massive energy users to provide firm, local, clean power hour by hour, especially during peak times. If they create the demand spike, they need to cover the cost and the risk associated with it.
Which brings us right back to those debates happening now in places like Virginia and Georgia about rate design. Should these huge data centers be in their own special rate class, where the costs they impose are directly assigned to them? Or do we let those costs spread out, meaning families effectively provide the financial bridge for this massive tech expansion?
And that leaves a really important question for you, the listener, to think about. If regulators manage to isolate and assign these very large costs That $12 million annual capacity hit, the $27 million substation rebuild directly to the entity creating the demand, then household bills should remain relatively stable from this specific pressure.
But if they don't,
But if they don't draw that clear line, if the costs get socialized across everyone, then it's ultimately families and small businesses who are backstopping the rapid growth of AI. The fundamental challenge, really, for the next few years is figuring out how to ensure that immense private technological progress doesn't end up privatizing all the gains while socializing the utility infrastructure debt needed to support it.